March 1956, New Orleans. A record executive from Los Angeles stands in the cramped office of J&M Recording Studios, holding a stack of acetates. These aren't new recordings. They're 7 years of singles, hits and near misses, spanning 1949 to 1955. The songs have already sold millions of copies individually to black audiences across the South. But now, Imperial Records owner Lou Chudd wants to do something that's never been done before. He wants to compile them into an album for white teenagers. The problem isn't the music. The music has already proven itself in juke joints and black radio stations from Memphis to Mobile. The problem is the market. In 1956, rock and roll albums don't exist yet. There's Elvis, but he's just getting started. There's Bill Haley, but he's a novelty. And then there's Fats Domino, a 240-pound black Creole pianist who's been outselling both of them on the R&B charts for years. Chudd knows something the rest of the industry is only beginning to suspect. White kids are already buying Fats Domino singles. They're sneaking into black record stores. They're requesting his songs on mainstream radio. They're dancing to the Fat Man at parties their parents don't know about. But albums are different. Albums are a statement. Albums mean legitimacy. And in March 1956, no one knows if white America is ready to put a black man's face on their turntables. To understand why Lou Chudd was willing to take this gamble, you have to go back to 1949. That's when Chudd, a record distributor from Los Angeles, traveled to New Orleans looking for new talent. Local band leader Dave Bartholomew took him to a dive bar called the Hideaway Club. There, playing to a packed house of black dock workers and longshoremen, was a young pianist named Antoine Domino. Chudd signed him immediately. 2 weeks later, they recorded The Fat Man at Cosimo Matassa's J&M Studios. The song was a cleaned-up version of Junker Blues, a drug-themed number that had been making rounds in the city's rougher neighborhoods. Bartholomew rewrote the lyrics. Domino added his signature rolling triplets on piano. Engineer Cosimo Matassa captured it all on rudimentary 2-track equipment. The record sold 1 million copies by 1951. For the next 5 years, Domino and Bartholomew became a hit factory. Going Home. Going to the River. Please Don't Leave Me. Every few months, another R&B chart topper. By 1955, Domino had 5 gold records. He was the biggest selling black artist in America after Nat King Cole. But there was a ceiling. White radio wouldn't touch him. Major concert venues wouldn't book him. Record stores in white neighborhoods didn't stock his singles. Then, in July 1955, something changed. A song called Ain't That a Shame crossed over. It hit number 10 on the pop charts, the first time a Fats Domino record appeared on a chart meant for white audiences. But there was a twist. A white singer named Pat Boone recorded a cover version, sanitized and sped up, that went to number 1. Suddenly, Lou Chudd saw the paradox. White teenagers wanted Fats Domino's music. They just didn't know they wanted Fats Domino. The album, Chudd decided, would change that. It would be called Rock and Rollin' with Fats Domino. The title itself was a gamble, a deliberate attempt to rebrand years of rhythm and blues as something new, something safe, something white kids could buy without explaining to their parents. But first, Chudd had to figure out which songs to include, and more importantly, how to sell them. The decision to compile an album exposed an uncomfortable truth. Most of Fats Domino's biggest R&B hits would never work for a white audience, not because of the music, because of the lyrics. Songs like Every Night About This Time and Going to the River were too explicitly about black life, black neighborhoods, black experiences. Chudd and Bartholomew knew that white teenagers might dance to Domino's piano, but they wouldn't connect with references they didn't understand. So they made cuts. Some songs were deemed too slow, others too bluesy. A few were shelved because they mentioned specific streets in New Orleans or used slang that wouldn't translate. What emerged was a 12-track collection that prioritized accessibility over authenticity. The Fat Man opened the album, Domino's first hit, now 6 years old, but still the clearest statement of his sound. Then came Ain't That a Shame, the crossover smash that had proven white audiences would buy his music if marketed correctly. Other inclusions: Boll Weevil, I'm in Love Again, Poor Me. But there was another problem. A bigger one. As Chud prepared the album for release, Pat Boone's cover of Ain't That a Shame was still dominating the charts. In a 1977 interview, Domino would later recall his reaction. When I first heard it, I didn't like it. It took 2 months to write and he put it out almost the same time I did. It kind of hurt. Dave Bartholomew was less diplomatic. He would later call Boone a lucky white boy, whose success came from label owner Randy Wood's practice of rushing out sanitized covers of R&B hits before the original artists could capitalize on crossover potential. The message was clear. Even if Fats Domino's album succeeded, the industry had already built a system to undermine him. The cover of Rockin' Rollin' with Fats Domino featured something unusual for 1956. A woodcut portrait of a black man, smiling, seated at a piano. No apologies, no compromise, no attempt to hide who was making this music. It was a statement, but it was also a risk. Imperial Records had seen other labels try to downplay black artists' race through abstract cover art or anonymous group photos. The thinking was simple. If white teenagers didn't know the artist was black, they might buy the record anyway. Lou Chud rejected that approach. If this album was going to work, it had to be honest about what it was selling. But honesty brought its own complications. In March 1956, just as the album was released, Domino hit the road with a package tour called Rhythm and Blues of 1956. The lineup included Ruth Brown, the Clovers, the Cadillacs, and Little Richard. The tour was booked into venues across the South, some segregated, some cautiously integrated, all tense. At a show in Roanoke, Virginia on May 6th, a fight broke out between black and white audience members in the balcony. Newspaper reports the next day blamed the music, calling it inflammatory and dangerous. Within days, the American Legion facility that hosted the show banned race mixing at future concerts. Then, on July 7th, in San Jose, California, 3,500 fans packed into Palomar Gardens. Lines wrapped around 6 blocks. The crowd was mixed, black and white teenagers dancing together for one of the first times in California history. But as the night wore on, alcohol and racial tensions collided. Fights erupted. Police were called. The press labeled it one of the earliest rock and roll riots. On September 15th, at a naval station in Newport, Rhode Island, another fight broke out during Domino's set. This time, the Navy banned rock music shows entirely. Base commanders cited concerns about integration and alcohol, but the real fear was clear. Fats Domino's music was breaking down barriers faster than American society was ready to accept. And then came Fayetteville. November 2nd, 1956. Breeze's Landing, Fayetteville, North Carolina. Fats. Domino is halfway through his set when the first bottle shatters against the stage. Then another. Within seconds, the entire venue descends into chaos. Black and white audience members fighting, police rushing in, tear gas filling the air. Domino, a seasoned veteran of such disturbances, does what he's learned to do. He jumps out a window. 2 members of his band are slightly injured in the escape. The press predictably calls it a race riot. But saxophonist Herb Hardesty, who was there that night, would later insist it wasn't about race at all. There was a fight, he recalled. Within the fight, the police decided to throw tear gas in the hall, and everybody panicked. Still, the damage was done. By the end of 1956, 4 major riots had occurred at Fats Domino concerts. Politicians, psychiatrists, journalists, and parents all began demanding answers. Was rock and roll inherently dangerous? Was integration happening too fast? Should black artists be allowed to perform for white audiences? Fats Domino, in interviews, refused to play along with the panic. When a reporter asked if his music was causing riots, he smiled sweetly and said, "As far as I know, music makes people happy." But privately, the violence was taking a toll. Domino's biographer Rick Coleman would later explain, "He had 4 major riots at his shows, partly because of integration, but also the fact that they had alcohol at these shows. So they were mixing alcohol, plus dancing, plus the races together for the first time in a lot of these places. And in the middle of all this chaos, Rock and Rollin' with Fats Domino was climbing the Billboard Pop Albums chart. By fall, it had reached number 17. The success of the album did something unexpected. It didn't just prove that white teenagers would buy Fats Domino's music. It proved they'd been buying it all along. Record store owners started reporting a phenomenon. White kids coming in and asking specifically for Fats Domino records, not Pat Boone covers. Radio DJs in Cleveland, Chicago, and Detroit started playing the original versions instead of the sanitized retreads. And in integrated concerts across the country, audiences, black and white, sang every word. But the mainstream music industry didn't know what to do with this information. In September 1956, Domino appeared on The Steve Allen Show. Allen, a television host known for mocking rock and roll, had famously humiliated Elvis Presley earlier that year by making him perform in a tuxedo to a basset hound. When Domino took the stage, Allen expected another punchline. Instead, Domino performed "When My Dreamboat Comes Home" and "I'm in Love Again" with such effortless charisma that Allen was forced to acknowledge something he hadn't wanted to admit. This music wasn't going away. And more importantly, it was good for ratings. Then came Blueberry Hill. The song was recorded in June 1956 at Master Recorders in Hollywood during a session where Domino had run out of material. He suggested they try an old standard, a 1940 pop song by Vincent Rose, Al Lewis, and Larry Stock that had been recorded by Glenn Miller, Gene Autry, and Louis Armstrong. Dave Bartholomew hated the idea. He thought it was too overdone, too old-fashioned, too far from Domino's style. But Lou Chudd insisted. And engineer Bunny Robbins spent hours splicing together multiple takes to create a final version. Blueberry Hill was released in September as the B-side to Honey Chile. Within weeks, it became Domino's biggest hit ever. It reached number 2 on the pop charts, stayed at number 1 on the R&B charts for 11 weeks, and sold more than 5 million copies worldwide. Country singer Carl Perkins later recalled, "In the white honky-tonks where I was playing, they were punching Blueberry Hill on the jukebox, and white cats were dancing to Fats Domino." For the first time, a black artist had a crossover hit that wasn't being overshadowed by a white cover version. The original was outselling every imitation. And yet, when Domino appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show on November 18, 1956, to perform Blueberry Hill, the rest of his band was hidden behind a curtain. Sullivan's producers decided that one black face on television was enough. More than that might upset sponsors. By the end of 1956, Fats Domino had become one of the biggest selling artists in America. Rock and Rollin' with Fats Domino had reached number 17 on the Pop Albums chart, an achievement almost unheard of for a black artist. He was earning $2,500 per night on the road, grossing over $500,000 a year. He owned 50 suits, 100 pairs of shoes, and a $1,500 diamond horseshoe stick pin. But success came with a cost. When Domino toured the South, he and his band were routinely denied lodging. They'd play to sold-out white crowds, then drive hours out of their way to find hotels that would accept them. In August 1957, he was banned from performing at Griffith Stadium in Washington, D.C., because City Commissioner Robert McLaughlin cited security concerns. a polite way of saying local authorities didn't want integrated audiences. The riots had also taken a psychological toll. Domino, by nature shy and soft-spoken, began to withdraw from the public eye. He gave fewer interviews. He avoided confrontations. When asked about race, he deflected. When asked about riots, he talked about the music. But the industry had learned something from Fats Domino's success. There was a market for black music, as long as it could be packaged correctly. And if packaging failed, there was always the cover version. Other artists began following Domino's model. Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and Bo Diddley all started getting more airplay on white radio. Record labels started signing black R&B artists with an eye toward crossover potential. And slowly the term rock and roll began to replace rhythm and blues in mainstream conversations. Fats Domino had forced the door open, but he was still standing outside. It took years for the music industry to fully acknowledge what Fats Domino had accomplished with Rollin with Fats Domino. In the moment, the album was seen as a commercial success, a smart compilation that capitalized on a hot trend. But as the 1950s gave way to the 1960s, critics and musicians began to recognize it as something more, a document of a cultural shift. Elvis Presley, in a 1957 interview, said, "A lot of people seem to think I started this business, but rock and roll was here a long time before I came along. Let's face it, I can't sing it like Fats Domino can. I know that." The Beatles, growing up in Liverpool, studied Domino's records obsessively. John Lennon later said that "Ain't That a Shame" was the first song he ever learned to play on guitar. Paul McCartney would eventually record 3 Domino songs: "Ain't That a Shame," "I'm in Love Again," and "I'm Gonna Be a Wheel Someday," for his 1988 album as a tribute. Even Pat Boone, the man who'd built his career covering Domino songs, acknowledged the debt. In later interviews, Boone claimed that his covers helped introduce Domino to white audiences, selling 10 times as many records and paving the way for the originals to be accepted. Whether this was true or self-justifying revisionism remains debated. But by the 1980s, the consensus was clear. Rock and Rollin' with Fats Domino was one of the first albums to prove that rock and roll could be commercially viable as an LP format, not just as singles. In 1986, Fats Domino was among the first class of inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The citation, "The influence of Rock and Rollin' with Fats Domino extended far beyond album sales. First, it established a template. After Domino's compilation succeeded, other labels began releasing similar packages. Chuck Berry's After School Session, 1957. Little Richard's Here's Little Richard, 1957. Jerry Lee Lewis's Debut, 1958. The idea that a rock and roll artist could sustain a full album, not just a hit single, became industry standard. Second, it changed how black music was marketed. Before Domino, R&B artists were mostly confined to the race records section of stores. After Rock and Rollin' with Fats Domino, labels began pushing black artists into the pop mainstream, rebranding them as rock and roll to reach white audiences. Third, it proved that authenticity could sell. Lou Chudd's decision to put Domino's face on the cover, unobscured, unapologetic, was a risk that paid off. White teenagers didn't need black music to be whitewashed. They wanted the real thing. And perhaps most importantly, the album demonstrated that integration could happen through culture before it happened through law. As biographer Rick Coleman noted, "There was this historic moment in American history where things were kinda coming together, and people don't really credit rock and roll for integrating America, but it really did." Fats. Domino's influence can be heard everywhere. In the piano-driven rock of Jerry Lee Lewis and Little Richard, in the rhythm of early Motown, in the swagger of New Orleans funk, in the way reggae and ska borrowed his syncopated beat. Dr. John, Alan Toussaint, and countless others cite Domino as the foundation of their sound. Even today, Blueberry Hill remains one of the most recognizable songs in American popular music. It's been covered by Elvis Presley, the Beach Boys, Led Zeppelin, and hundreds of others. It's in movies, commercials, and tribute albums. It's shorthand for a particular kind of innocence, the moment when rock and roll was young and anything felt possible. Rock and Rollin' with Fats Domino is not the greatest album ever made. It's not even the most important album of 1956. But it is the album that proved something the industry didn't want to believe: that black music, performed by black artists, could sell to white audiences without compromise or cover versions. The lesson should have been simple. Instead, it took decades to sink in. Fats Domino never got the credit he deserved. He sold more than 65 million records in his lifetime, more than any rock pioneer except Elvis. But he remains underappreciated in the public imagination. Ask most people who invented rock and roll, and they'll name Chuck Berry, Elvis, or Little Richard before they mention Fats Domino. Maybe it's because Domino was too gentle. He didn't shake his hips like Elvis or scream like Little Richard. He didn't write protest songs or make bold political statements. He just played the piano, smiled, and made people happy. But that modesty obscures the radicalism of what he did. In 1956, putting a black man on an album cover marketed to white teenagers was an act of defiance. Playing integrated concerts in the Jim Crow South was an act of courage. Refusing to sanitize his sound or change his name was an act of self-respect. Rock and Rollin' with Fats Domino is a reminder that cultural change doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly in the form of a compilation album, a piano riff, and a voice that refuses to pretend it's something it's not. Fats Domino stayed in New Orleans his entire life. He died there in 2017 at the age of 89, having never left the lower Ninth Ward for long. He didn't chase fame. He didn't chase trends. He just played his music the way he always had and let the world come to him. And the world did.